I'm Joe Bongiovanni. I live in Harborton, Virginia, but I'm part of the Kettle Pond Institute for Debt-Free Money, which is an institute in Plainfield, Vermont. And I'm a monetary reform activist. I've been a monetary reform activist pretty much all of my adult life. My dad was a monetary reformer. And I come to learn that the most important thing that we can do in the world is to change the money system so that we can be free of debt. When I say free of debt, I mean, as free of debt as we can be. It's either that or we're going to continue in the path where we are, which is we're going to have all the debt and everybody paying interest to the people who create the debt. So I'm a monetary reformer. We need to reform the money system, and that's what I advocate. Somebody has to have some understanding or some idea about what money is. And so the object therefore has to be to correct what's mostly the misunderstanding and the misinformation about money. And that is that most people think that the government creates the money, and the government doesn't create the money. Private banks create the money, and they create it as a debt. So you just sort of have to look around at the situation that we're in. And when you take a look around the situation, what you find is that there's too much debt and there's not enough money. Right now, if you talk about the fiscal crisis that we're in, for instance, okay, well, the government can't afford to issue any more debt. That's the Austerian thing. So that comes down to very serious implications for our society and for our individuals as far as families and all of that goes, and our communities. So if people don't understand money and how money is created and how money comes into existence and how money works in the world, they'll never be able to understand why it's important to basically achieve the goals that they want. And when I say that, what I mean is that the things that are important to people don't have to do with money, okay? They have to do with real things, like, for instance, the health of their children, maybe the education of their children, maybe, the well-being of their community, having, an adequate, force of public figures that are going to come to their aid when they have an accident and those kind of things. So the things that matter to real people are all influenced by, now to a very large degree determined by the monetary system and the amount of debt that we all have. And we need to be able to figure it out that there's a way to free ourselves from what they call debt slavery. That's kind of the debt servitude. That's kind of the thing that's out there. And unfortunately, a lot of people have the wrong idea about money. And because they have the wrong idea about money, they have the wrong idea about solving their problems. They don't realize that money is the actual root solution to the problems that they have. And therefore they miss being able to achieve those solutions. Basically, all the kind of problems that we have today, and especially if you consider environmental types of problems, as I would say it, that we can't afford to solve our environmental problems. We can't afford to oppose environmental destruction. We can't afford to stop the pipeline or fracking or any other aspect of things that are destroying the physical environment. We just can't afford to do it. We'd like to do it, but we can't afford to do it. And the reason we can't afford to do it is because the way the money system works, the banks create the money, and the first thing the bank corporation does is gives it to a finance corporation. The finance corporation takes the money and invests it in something, and they have to get a high return on their investment. So we have a whole situation where all the factors that affect the monetary system are working against the real people. They're working against the good of the real people. They're working against the home of the real people, that is the earth, okay? And they're working against the societies that we've tried to create and to accomplish. And until people understand that fact, that the monetary system is the foundation issue for all reform, for all political reform, social reform, economic reform, environmental reform, all of those reforms have to first be able to be dealt with in terms of money. And money is not, some kind of abstract thing that, we don't need to care about. One of the things that I hear from a lot of activists is, well, you just go ahead and deal with the money. I'm going to deal with whatever I'm working on, education of children. That's very important. I need to work on education of children. How's the budget going? Well, we don't have a budget. We're going to bring in a bunch of volunteers. That's great, but what about if you had a budget for education? What about if you controlled the monetary system? The first use of money went to educate the children, like it should be, Then we would have a whole different world. So people need to understand the importance of the monetary system, the money system, that there is, first of all, a money system, and that somebody controls it, and either it's going to work for us or it's going to work against us. The way the whole money system works is that the banks create all the money. That's the most important thing to know. Once you know that, you say, well, how does that work, that the banks create the money? They create the money by issuing loans. That means that all money is created as a debt. There's no money in existence unless there's a debt associated with that money. Even when you pay back the loan, so you have to have another loan. So all money is existence as a debt. So how does that debt work? Well, it works, on the kind of the market principle of risk-reward. That is to say, the highest risk gets the highest reward. So we have a system where we're going to say, well, what about, the things that we don't really care about the risk and the reward? How about the things that matter more to people? No, those things don't come into the equation until iterations of money change hands, and through taxation, for instance, or whatever, so that there's a public use to the money. We need to change that so that the whole priority becomes the people that need it the most are the lowest echelon of society. They need money more than anybody, and they don't have access to it. The only way to get access to it is to have the government directly pay money into the economy, pay directly money into the economy, in something that's in the national budget. And Congressman Dennis Kucinich's bill should be required reading for every activist, because activists that don't understand the money system, I'll make this point, they will be fighting with other activists, There's only a certain pool of money that the whole monetary system and the whole banking system makes available. And if you want to fight over who gets that part of the tax dollar or who gets that part of the economy, the banks will be glad to let you do that. But if you want to have both the environment protected and education of the children, and an economy where the people's wages are being earned adequately to pay a normal bill, a living wage kind of a thing, you're never going to do that unless you control the money system. That's all there is to it. The way the money system works, with all the money coming into existence as a debt, means that the bank is going to first look at the creditworthiness of the borrower. And on the basis of that, the people that don't need the money, are going to be the first ones to get it, because they have equity, they have credit, they've got experience, so they get the money. They're the first ones in line, they get it, and they get it the cheapest, So the bulk of the money goes to the highest return on investment, that's the financiers, And then it works its way down through the economy, and eventually, if there's any money left over, the people who need it the most get it, but when they get it, they get it last, and they pay the most for it. So we have an economy that is working to basically transfer wealth from the lowest people to the highest people. And that's how we get the 99% versus the 1%. It's built into the money system. The money system works to the advantage of the people who create the money. I think that the most important thing to understand is that once we understand that we have a money system, that we have a monetary system, that we understand that within that monetary system, there's a proper role for that money. The role for money in the system has to do with whether or not it works in the way it is now, with debt, to concentrate wealth in the hands of the debt creators, versus what Dr. Frederick Soddy, who is a Nobel Prize winner, but not in economics and not in money, but in chemistry, and he came to study money, and he said, well, yeah, the problem is that what we need to do is distribute the wealth that's created, and we have a money system that concentrates the wealth that's created, and so therefore the money system is not working towards its proper role, which is to distribute the wealth that society creates. And until we do that, until we transfer the role of money to become distributive, we are going to remain in this battle between the public and itself. Some people will always wonder, why is somebody like you using Milton Friedman, as a guy who explains the importance of a level playing field? And Milton Friedman was, believe it or not, a monetary reformer. Now, don't run away just because I said that, because he had all these other problems, okay? But he was a monetary reformer. He studied under Simons and Fisher and people who understood money. And basically what he realized is that if you don't level the playing field with money, okay, that is to say make money a tool of the people, a service of the people, a utility of the people, to provide the service that money can provide, if you don't have that, then you're going to end up with a playing field where a certain group of people are going to take the advantage of issuing the money. And if they issue the money, just think about that. Well, then everybody has to come to them for their place at the bat, you know, to try to figure out how they're going to get access to it. And that creates an unlevel playing field. If one group of businesses has the right to create its own assets out of nothing and then rent those assets to the rest of us, that's a playing field that is incredibly unlevel, a playing field that Friedman says does not support free markets. Free markets can only be supported on a level playing field. The whole free market concept is that we're all equal in the marketplace, and you go there and you create by your craft of understanding how the market works. But if there's a group of people in the marketplace, and that group of people controls the issuance of the money, then there cannot be a level playing field. So basically, we have a systemic unleveling of the playing field, where the rich. That's why the rich get richer. That's why the poor get poorer. It's because we don't have a level playing field with money. And until we level the playing field with money, we can't have a level playing field with free markets. Now here, Mr. Free Market, Milton Friedman, he recognized that. He called for government issuance of the money without debt. Imagine that, Milton Friedman. One of the things that we have, you know, at the top of that unlevel playing field is the assurance of plenty. Okay, because those people have access to money, or they create money, they have access to money, they have the money the cheapest, and then on the other side of the playing field is the people that need it the most, and they pay the most for it, and the result of that is the fact that what's guaranteed for them is a whole life of servitude, a whole life of doing nothing but borrowing money when they can get it, paying interest on whatever money they can come by, usually credit cards, quite frankly. You know, that's basically takes the place of wages among that group of people. So they use their credit cards and they pay more money than anybody. So the people that need it the most get it last and pay the most for it. That's the way the money system works. And if anybody can't figure out the nexus, the connection between the money system imbalances, the money system, I don't know if you want to call it the bastardization of the money system, but that's what it is. You know, it's a money system that works in reverse. And until we change the dynamic of how money is created, that's the dynamic. That's what it's all about, how money is created, either as a debt held by private people or as equity held by the government in the Commonwealth. The money system common is what I advocate. If you think about the fact that what kind of a problem that we have right now, for instance, okay? We have X number of unemployed, okay? We have X number of idle factories. We have X number of empty stores. We have X number of physical resources. And all of those could be put to work, okay? And by the way, they can be put to work with a minimum of environmental destruction if we put them to work using public money. Then we would take the idle resources that we have and turn them into production. Now that doesn't necessarily, that's what I want to make clear, is that doesn't necessarily mean a further destruction of the environment. Because what we need to do is we need to have meaningful work. And that meaningful work can be anything. You know, making a film about money is meaningful work. And people should be compensated for that. But where's the money going to come from to pay somebody to make a film about a money system that's not working? It's not going to come from the bankers, I can promise you that. In order to have an understanding of the relationship of money to the physical world, okay? And this goes to the environmental aspect of it, you know. Dr. Frederick Soddy, when he was writing his book about the role of money, he said, well, we have to understand the real relationship between our physical environment and how the money system works. Because the way the money system works right now is it pulls the natural resources out of the environment and leaves the pollution and leaves the destruction of the environment behind. Why? Because it's economic and because they can do it that way. Whereas if we take the real economy, the real use of resources and all of that stuff into account, and try to make the money system into a sustainable economy and into a sustainable environment. We won't do that. The aspect of pollution and the aspect of destruction and all of that has to get factored internally into the equation of, is this a good investment or not? And until that happens, we will continue to make bad investments. Money will come and go to the externalizing environmental costs from the cost of goods and resources and commodities that are produced. And the more that we externalize those costs, the worse off the environment is. That's like the definition of a destroyed environment, is externalizing costs. Marx did not understand money at all. He never understood money. And Marx was willing to work with the private bankers. I'm not here to criticize Marx, okay? But the fact of the matter is that there has never been a socialist or a communist theorist, okay, who understood money. Now, having said that, Trotsky was the closest, I felt, to understand money, and a couple of French socialists whose names just escape me right at the moment, understood money. But in some, the entire left of the left do not understand money, and in fact, they usually refuse to engage it as a substance of discussion, because it doesn't matter to them. Okay, it's the means of production. It's all the things that count under both socialism and communism. And I'm kind of a bit of a socialist myself, but when it comes to money, I'm a nationalist. Money is issued by nations. It's up to the nation to control the issuance of the money. A nation that controls the issuance of the money, all you have to worry about is fascism. Okay. And so if you ensure that the issuance of the money is something that happens for the good of the people, you are well on your way to controlling all those other issues that are important. The means of production. Not that you control the means of production, but you influence the means of production by true economic decision making. You say money is a commodity, and because it's a commodity, if you control the issuance, imagine that you had a commodity that you didn't have to go and acquire. Imagine that you have a commodity that you can just create. It's like you could create wheat, or you could create, anything that is a real commodity, and you could do it out of thin air, and then you could market it. That's the situation with money, okay? And until you take the commodity nature of money out of money, that is to say, money resorts back to its means of exchange function in the economy. Money has to be available to function as a means of exchange. That's the primary function of money. Sort of like the definition of money is that which serves as the universal means of exchange. So if that's the definition of money, then how does it become a commodity? It's an exchange media. And it should be only created by the government, because why? There's a production and a consumption of goods and services. That's what an economy is about, and you need to have a means of exchange in order for those things to happen. So that's how money should function, and it will never function that way really as long as it is a tradable commodity, a marketable commodity, as long as we live under capital markets, okay? Capital markets determining what money is all about. So we have to get away from that. There are those who think that the problems that we have today of too much debt and too much malinvestment and all that can be corrected by going to the gold standard. The gold standard doesn't matter, okay? It really does not matter. You could have a gold standard or not have a gold standard. It really doesn't matter. Just depends on who controls the gold. Just like the thing that matters is who controls the money, okay? So then it matters who controls the gold. If you have a gold standard, and I'm sorry, but this is what my dad always said to me, it's okay to have a gold standard if the government controls all the gold, because then the value of the money, which is the purchasing power of the currency, is determined by the government, which whatever relationship it has to gold. So gold is no answer to solving any of the problems that we have today, okay? It's not that. However, neither is it necessarily, okay, because of what it is, of its natural properties. Neither it is, the boogeyman that has been said to be. So gold should be functioning in the market right now for whatever use it serves. and it's primarily used industrial, creation of jewelry, creation of things that have value to persons. Your personal value of something that's made out of gold. That's what it should be. Now it's an investment vehicle. Okay. Now you can buy a future of gold. Now you can buy an interest in gold. And relate things. So it becomes another marketable commodity. And as a marketable commodity, it should not back money. It should never back money if it's a marketable commodity. If people want to invest, in gold and hold gold as something that protects their investment, no, that's fine. But that's true for anything. But it shouldn't be back in the currency. You see, it shouldn't be back in the currency. I mean, oil is just another commodity. That's all it is, And the fact that oil is a form of energy, and therefore is an input into creating real wealth. It has value, just like labor has real value. Okay, so oil has real value, but not as something that's going to be back in the currency, or something that's going to be determining the value of the currency, or how the currency systems work. Okay, the currencies are national identities. They're important to nations and people of nations. In terms of international relations, your economy is all your economy is all the resources that you have. The United States has 50 states. It has so many minerals. It has so many pieces of agricultural geography. It has so many people. It has so many educated and trained citizens. It has so much productive capacity. That's the economy. That's all the economy is all about. Money should function to serve that the people deciding to use those resources in the best way to their most well-being is that money should serve that. And it just shouldn't be related to any commodity that's marketed. Any commodity that's marketed should not have a role in determining the value of the currency, the purchasing power of the currency, or anything like that. It should not work that way. Stephen considers it a distraction. I consider it as an adjunct, like local currencies. Okay. Because they can add resilience to local economies just in case banks don't lend, okay? But if there's an adequate money supply, and if that adequate money supply is distributed on a per capita basis, which is basically how part of the percentage bill works, and how, generally speaking, it's the most equitable way of having a money system, is if new money goes equitably to people, there's no need for a public banking. But having said that, okay, I'm a credit union member, okay? And I believe in credit unions, and I believe in cooperative banking, and I believe in all of that stuff. But those are actually private. Those are actually private banking, regimes. They're not public banking. So public banking then has to come down to a level of state or county or other public jurisdictions, municipality, right? So you say to yourself, well, should those people be banking? Well, only if there's an unmet need for credit. If there's an unmet need for credit in any of those jurisdictions, there's nothing wrong with using the public purse as a means of lending. Okay, lending the money that the public can acquire. But that's the limit of it. They shouldn't be banking, really. They shouldn't do banking the way banking is done today, which is on a fractional reserve basis. Okay, they should only do public banking on the basis of, I have $100 to lend, I lend $100. Somebody pays me back the $100, I revolve that into another loan. And in those circumstances, like I said, it can definitely serve a strengthening of the economy. But if there's adequate money and the private options that are similar, and again, I use credit unions and cooperative banks, and limited purpose banks or special purpose banks for things like mortgages, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, there are remedies available to ensure that credit needs of the community are met, and public banking is one of those ways of doing it. But it's definitely not a panacea, and it's definitely not a substitute for getting a real honest money system going and working. Because if we have a real honest money system going and working, the need for state or public banking is very much diminished. Complimentary card is very much the same. It's very much the same because what do they add? They add exchange media in a place where there's no available exchange media. You know, my daughter's involved in a local currency exchange, and she provides services that she takes, you know, the local unit, and she uses that unit to buy things in the community. Why? Because there's not enough money in the community to fund those things. That's why they do it. Okay, it's a sort of a barter system. Okay, but what it really does is takes the place of credit, and again, all of those things can be incremental in achieving the highest exchange, you know, throughput, as the economists call it, in any community's economy. So they all can do something that's really good, but what they can do is limited to meeting the shortfall, if you will, of the economy that's run by money. You know, the holders of the national debt are varied. Okay, yeah, they definitely include foreign banks more than anything. You know, that is to say, as far as foreign holders, foreign banks are the largest holders, and private people and banks. The banks own a huge proportion of the national debt, and then you know, investment funds, pension funds, those guys all hold the national debt. The debt jubilee discussions really do not relate to the national debt. Okay, they relate to private debt. We actually don't have a public debt problem in this country. That is to say, the scale of the public debt is not a problem. What's a problem is that the government should not need to borrow at all. Okay, but the scale of the public debt is not a problem. It can be paid off when it matures. But private debt is the problem. You know, when the economy shut down, it had nothing to do with public debt. You know, and the rise in public debt is because the private debt system failed, and so we have a situation where people are talking about, well, there's so much debt in the economy that nobody can move forward. People can't move forward because they're debt encumbered and saturated at a level that, well, it's unprecedented. So what are we going to do about that? Now, some people talk about a debt jubilee. Okay, and the debt jubilee, you know, as kind of outlined these days by Steve Keen and others, you know, involves basically a paying down of that private debt to try to reduce that level of private debt. The problem is, with the Keen proposal, is funded by public debt rising in order to pay down the private debt, and that's not a solution. There's no good going to come to the public and to the taxpayers by having private debt become public debt. So to me, the Jubilee thing is a sort of a recognition that there's a fail of the money system. Okay, it's a fail of the money system, and I'm not saying, and that's a bona fide finding. There is a fail of the money system, but that's not the solution. You know, the solution is to turn over the creation of money as a equity in the Commonwealth as opposed to a debt to private bankers. There's two things that are going on. One thing is the fact that right now the Federal Reserve is holding a bunch of public debt. Okay, it's bought. That's basically quantitative easing has been primarily the central bank, which is a private bank, buying up government treasuries out in the market, just going out in the market saying we want to buy up these treasuries. So now the Fed is holding all those treasuries. So the federal government's still paying on those treasuries. Okay, federal government borrowed those treasuries and is making those payments to the Fed. So the implication is that the Fed is receiving that money. Now, ultimately, the Fed, okay, takes its net profits and pays them back to the Treasury. Okay, that's what it does. That's how it works. And because of that, most people don't complain about it. They say, oh, well, now I pay my taxes to Treasury. Treasury pays its interest to the Fed. The Fed pays its net income back to the Treasury, which reduces my tax burden. So people say, well, that's not really so bad. That's almost the same as the government creating money out of nothing, okay? Once the Fed holds it, and in order to work out the public debt problem, that may be a route to go, okay? But first, somebody has to create the money that buys the debt. And in that case, the Federal Reserve does not create money, it just creates reserve balances. It trades for the bank that's holding a treasury reserve balances. So now that bank has reserve balances, which is a little too complicated to get into in order to try to understand how the money system works, but I would leave it to say that it evades the real solutions. And there's no need for most people to understand that. People have questions about it, that's one thing, but to understand that, the public debt is not a problem. It can be resolved in different ways. Now, having said that, I don't want you to think that I'm saying the public debt is not a problem, because like I said, the public debt is the government borrowing money. The government of this country has the power to create all the money. And if you had the power to create the money, and you said to me, here, you create the money, I'll borrow it from you, people would think that you were insane, okay? And that's basically the situation that we have right now. The government that has the power to create the money has given that power to the private banks, and the private banks now lend money to the government and pays interest on it and collects that from the taxpayers. That is unfair to the taxpayers. So in that sense, public debt is a problem, okay? But in terms of the scale of it, in terms of the trillions of dollars of it, it is able to be managed to neutrality, that is to say, to be not a problem. Well, some people would question whether or not, if we reform the money system and the Treasury is now issuing the money, that's a power that it's too great for the government to have it. And there's definitely some validity to that. So what I want to say, because right now we have a totally corrupt government. Our government is totally corrupt, and it's controlled by the bankers and the money powers. We have basically two political parties. And I would think that that's the main objection that people have is, well, are you really changing anything if the political parties control the government and the government's issuing the money? And the banks control the political parties. So what we need to do is to get out of the whole dynamic, right? And I agree with that, okay? But we have to do that mechanically, methodologically. We have to be able to accomplish that goal. But once the Treasury has the power to issue the money, it's not going to be beholden to the banks, okay? That will over time evaporate that political power, corporate political power, the bank corporations over the government. So then you have a situation where, what about the government issuing the money just generally? Isn't that too much power for the government? The answer is no, okay, because of this reason. The only power that the government has is to create its budget and then spend that money into existence, and to define within the budgeting process how much of that money is going to be spent into existence. That's the power. So we say to ourselves, well, then how do you determine how much money to create? And that should not be the role, okay, of the government that's elected by the people, okay? That should be a function of what I call a technocrat, okay? Because what we want to have is the government to issue into existence the exact amount of money that's neither inflationary nor deflationary, okay? So I'm just saying we have a $15 trillion economy and it's going to grow at 2%. That means we need $300 billion of new money next year in order to grow the economy by 2%. And $300 billion is the number. And that's $300 billion is the number that goes into the Treasury's budget. So there has been no gamesmanship. That issuance by the Treasury merely reduces the need that currently goes to borrowing, okay, but it also goes to reducing taxation. So we have a situation where the government doesn't really have any more power as long as the determination of how much new money is created is done by what I call, they call it the fourth branch of government, the branch that determines how much new money needs to come into existence in order to meet our total social objectives that we achieve through the government. And in order to do that, we need to accept that somebody has to make that call. Gil Scott did the song about the revolution will not be televised, and the other people say, well, the revolution will not be funded, and there's a huge truth to that in this sense. Okay, if there's a group of people who are taking advantage of this present money system with its tax advantages to the rich, so that the rich can make donations primarily. I know, I realize that a lot of it, some of it happens on a much smaller scale, but that the rich make donations, they set up foundations, and they fund social change. They fund social change. And I've been involved all my life with working with some of those organizations, and they're all good organizations, and they all need to, affect the change. And the ones that get it, just depending on how progressive, the institution is, will try to accomplish something. But the minute they really accomplish something, they're going to fall on the other side of that's what's funded. So we have a situation where social change becomes a competition among well-minded people to get access to the means of affecting the social change, which is money power. Ultimately, it's money power. Ultimately, you can't have people, or ultimately you can't have information, good information, or ultimately you can't mobilize without money. So if those people want to continue this, ridiculous, kind of 100-year-old, experiment with debt-based money, and fighting over the crumbs, quite frankly, okay, versus getting the funding directly. How do you do that? You do that if you take a look at the reform bills that are proposed, you take a look at the Kucinich bill, you take a look at your community level. That's where the change takes place. The real change takes place at the community level. How do you get funding to the community? You get funding to the community through its next level of jurisdiction. Maybe that's a county, maybe that's the state. Well, whatever it is, it's something that needs to be funded. And the only way that you can get that funding directly is through reform in the money system. The Kucinich bill proposes all new money that gets created, 25% goes to the states. The states determine where that money gets spent. Now, that's the only jurisdiction that the federal government can deal with. Remember that the states gave up the money creation power. The states, when they were colonies, had the money creation power. And when they became, confederated, they gave up the money creation power to the federal government. The deal was, yeah, but the federal government has to take care of the states. Well, the question is, how are the states doing today? And what's the federal government done with the money creation power? So we have a situation where the federal government's given the money creation power to private banks, okay? The states have no economies because of the fact that the federal government gave it to the private banks, and they trashed the national economy. So the states have no money. So the municipalities have no money. So the communities have no money. So we have no vehicles. We have no vehicles. We have no transmission mechanism for money to flow down to the real needs of the community. And in order to reverse that, we have to reverse the way that money is created. And that's the most fundamental issue that is out there in the world today. And every activist that's out there getting ready to go to Haymarket or getting ready to go to wherever they're going to get their money needs to recognize that either they can take the deferred taxes, that the foundation people didn't pay into the government, so that somebody else has to pay that into the government, and fight over that, as minimal as it is, that's the option, versus going to reform to the money system, that the money system flows from the federal government to the states, from the states to the counties, to whatever jurisdiction it is, down to the community level, so that the community can solve its real problems. Communities can only solve their real problems when they have the resources to do it. And the main resource in an exchange-based economy is money. And until people understand that money represents purchasing power, even if that's just for well-being, even if it's not for a good, even if it's but money is the purchasing power for meeting the needs of the community. And that can be well done to replace the, what I call, kind of the nonprofit NGO thing. There should still be nonprofits, don't get me wrong, there should still be NGOs. But the money that goes to them should be determined by, if that community determines that that's a need for that community, then that should be funded, to whatever degree it can be, And that type of a dynamic can only come about if we change the money system. People honestly earn money, You know, people should be rewarded for both taking risk and bringing innovation and all kinds of good things into the market and creating new things. All of that should be rewarded. All of that should be rewarded. All of that should be paid for, and you know, people should be able to get rich. I'll be honest. People should be able to get rich. That's not the issue. Okay. What the issue is should those people then you know, benefit from the power that they get to create funding for nonprofits that are going to go out and actually do the good in the community that should be done anyway, you know, that should be funded anyway. And the fact that we have to go through this big circle of a flow of money and power, okay, back to somebody making that decision, how big to set up this foundation, how's it going to work, how do you come in here and apply for funds, how et cetera, et cetera. The American Monetary Institute could use some of that, you know, could use some of that money very really and make good use of it. But it will not get there because as soon as the American Monetary Institute comes up and says, you know what, we want to reform the money system so that we don't have to come back here and do this anymore, they will be cut off, you know, toot sweet. And that's what we have to avoid. We have to basically avoid the situation that we're in, because we've gotten to the concentration of wealth into totally unprecedented, you know, metrics. So we have a situation where how do we reverse that? You know, do we reverse that with more of the same? I don't think so. So in order to reverse it, you have to start providing money. The money has to flow into the lowest part. It can flow to the highest part. That's okay, but it has to flow first to the lowest part, so that we. Basically, I'm a believer in the living wage. I'm a believer in funding, you know, people doing whatever they want to be doing, as long as, you know, they're not destroying the environment, and as long as they're not, you know, destroying their neighbor, you know. So you know, up to a point, up to the living wage point. If everybody have access to a living wage, then people should be doing whatever they want with the living wage. Hopefully there's going to be a lot of craftsmen. Hopefully artists are going to flourish. You know, hopefully all kinds of good things are going to happen. People are going to become more independent because they have the living wage, et cetera, all of those things. But that will never happen with the monetary system that provides money first to the people who need it the least and who pay the least for it. And instead of, you know, the artist and the craftsman and the entrepreneur, real entrepreneur, you know, who wants to use their skills to create something that society needs. You know, the fact of the matter is that any country, any sovereign country can reform its own monetary system, and internally it will gain tremendously from doing that. But no country is an island, and so we have to deal with the economies of other countries. We're going to still continue to buy stuff, although quite frankly, we're going to buy a lot less stuff, but we're going to continue to buy stuff from other countries. There's going to be an international aspect to our money. The problem that we have now is that the international monetary arrangements have all really been made by the bankers. You know, almost exclusively at the times they were created through private central bankers. And so we have these relationships now, and we do need to have a plan to reform the international banking and financial and monetary authorities, okay? Because we really do need to have international monetary authorities. We can never really have a global economy that functions well if we don't have an international monetary authority making sure that everybody's acting honestly, you know, that everybody's actually not just stealing what they can for themselves and not letting somebody else. But that will be a complete reversal of the situation that we have right now, which is we have the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements. Those are banks for the central banks, okay? Those are banks for making sure that national central banks benefit from whatever is going on out in the world so that they can keep the system going. But regardless of their current power and their current intent, they will need to be reformed, and they will be reformed, because once the people actually control the money system, they will control everything that has to do with politics and economics. And that's what this is about. It's about political economics. It's an old science. It's a sort of a forgotten science. We've kind of gotten into more economics, more sociology, more highly refined studies. But political economics is what a nation is. A nation is about its political economy, and that's what this is about. And ultimately, nations cooperate. Ultimately, nations cooperate, and they will cooperate, and they should cooperate in bringing about new organizations at the international level. And they can, and new organization at the international level, properly developed, properly, established. There's no reason to fear them. Naomi Klein, she's absolutely right about what's happening. All the things that go on with the IMF and the BIS and the international financial capitalists. She's right about that. But she doesn't understand the money system. If she did, she'd say, the first thing she'd say, let's reform the money system. Then we can change all of that stuff. But if we don't reform the money system, the banks are still in charge. You can be as clever as you want and as smart as you want. Naomi Klein goes on, Rachel Maddow. It's like, wow, there's a lot of intellect right there. But what do they come away with? They come away with how terrible things are, not how to fix things. Well, my real advice to people watching this is to become informed. The first tool is education for anything. And so people need to come to understand the money system for what it is. Today I said, for the people that can stand it, to read The Role of Money. Because if you understand the role of money, you understand what's wrong. And if you understand what's wrong, you can begin to make it right. Is that most people think that the government creates the money, and the government doesn't create the money. Private banks create the money, and they create it as a debt. So you just sort of have to look around at the situation that we're in, and when you take a look around the situation, what you find is that there's too much debt, and there's not enough money. Right now, if you talk about the fiscal crisis that we're in, for instance, okay, well, the government can't afford to issue any more debt. That's the Austerian thing. So that comes down to very serious implications for our society and for our individuals as far as families and all of that goes, and our communities. So if people don't understand money and how money is created and how money comes into existence and how money works in the world, they'll never be able to understand why it's important to basically achieve the goals that they want. And when I say that, what I mean is that the things that are important to people don't have to, that is the earth, okay? And they're working against the societies that we've tried to create and to accomplish. And until people understand that fact, that the monetary system is the foundation issue for all reform, for all political reform, social reform, economic reform, environmental reform, all of those reforms have to first be able to be dealt with in terms of money. And money is not, some kind of abstract thing that we don't need to care about. One of the things that I hear from a lot of activists is, well, you just go ahead and deal with the money. I'm going to deal with whatever I'm working on. Education of children. That's very important. I need to work on education of children. How's the budget going? Well, we don't have a budget. We're going to bring in a bunch of volunteers. That's great. But what about if you had a budget for education? What about if you controlled the monetary system? The first use of money went to educate, to do with money, okay? They have to do with real things like, for instance, the health of their children, maybe the education of their children, maybe, the well-being of their community, having, an adequate, force of public figures that are going to come to their aid when they have an accident and those kind of things. So the things that matter to real people are all influenced by, now to a very large degree determined by the monetary system and the amount of debt that we all have. And we need to be able to figure it out that there's a way to free ourselves from what they call debt slavery. That's kind of the debt servitude. That's kind of the thing that's out there. And unfortunately, a lot of people have the wrong idea about money. And because they have the wrong idea about money, they have the wrong idea about solving their problems. They don't realize that money is the actual root solution to the problems that they have. And therefore they miss being able to achieve those solutions. Basically, all the kind of problems that we have today, and especially if you consider environmental types of problems, as I would say it, that we can't afford to solve our environmental problems. We can't afford to oppose environmental destruction. We can't afford to stop the pipeline or fracking or any other aspect of things that are destroying the physical environment. We just can't afford to do it. We'd like to do it, but we can't afford to do it. And the reason we can't afford to do it is because the way the money system works, the banks create the money, and the first thing the bank corporation does is gives it to a finance corporation. Finance corporation takes the money and invests it in something, and they have to get a high return on their investment. So we have a whole situation where all the factors that affect the monetary system are working against the real people. They're working against the good of the real people. They're working against the home of the real people. I'm Joe Bongiovanni. I live in Harborton, Virginia, but I'm part of the Kettle Pond Institute for Debt-Free Money, which is an institute in Plainfield, Vermont. And I'm a monetary reform activist. I've been a monetary reform activist pretty much all of my adult life. My dad was a monetary reformer. And I come to learn that the most important thing that we can do in the world is to change the money system so that we can be free of debt. When I say free of debt, I mean as free of debt as we can be. It's either that or we're going to continue in the path where we are, which is we're going to have all the debt and everybody paying interest to the people who create the debt. So I'm a monetary reformer. We need to reform the money system, and that's what I advocate. Somebody has to have some understanding or some idea about what money is. And so the object therefore has to be to correct what's mostly the misunderstanding and the misinformation about money. And that is